and EfTA board member, to help us introduce our first speaker.
Hey, thanks everyone. Excited that you could all join us today. And it's my pleasure to introduce a good friend of mine, Dr. Ron Abbott, who has graciously agreed to speak to you all today. Ron is the Vice President of Chemical Recycling for Vopak's New Energy Division. So Vopak is an international European-based storage and terminaling company that does many other work around the world and is particularly in the sustainability space, looking at exciting new opportunities. I've got to know Ron over the years at Chevron Phillips Chemical, where he had a over 30-year career in various roles, both in commercial, so doing business deals, all the way to strategy and planning related to finance and budget, to he ended his career with us at CP Chem as the sustainability research and technology manager over all of our sustainability efforts and the research and technology behind that. Ron has a PhD from the for Texas A&M University, and he has his bachelor's degree from University of Vermont. I used to like to tease him that he also did his postgraduate at University of Texas, so he's both an Aggie and a Longhorn, which he would always look at me funny because he is very much an Aggie, and I think both of his sons went to A&M. He has two grown sons, and one thing I'll just say about Ron is he's a fantastic person, and not only a brilliant scientist and business person, he's just a really good person. He's inspired me personally to increase my sustainability efforts and litter cleanup, and been a really positive example in my career for how we can look at sustainability as an important part of our business, and how we can be better stewards of our environment. So with that, I will turn it over now to Dr. Ron Abbott.
All right, Kenny, thanks so much. First of all, Kenny was so much fun to work with, so I appreciate the kind words. And yeah, we spend many a day and sometimes long into the nights on some projects we were working on. So it's so much fun to see familiar faces from prior employer. But what I want to do tonight is I really want to talk to the group about how to choose a career. And the reason why I want to do this is because my career choice was choppy. It was hard to get to the place where I wanted to be, but I got there, and now I couldn't be happier. But there's some surprises along the way. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I do want to encourage questions. We'll have the chat box open. If you have a question, please ask. There are no dumb questions. One of the biggest mistakes people make is not asking the question that you say, well, I shouldn't ask that. Chances are 3 of your friends had the same question. So please jump in. And with that, I'm going to try to make the slides. There we go. Okay. So what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is what would I tell my 18-year-old self? And this is actually inspired by Monica. So Monica, thanks so much. You brought that up during our discussion before the webinar. I thought, what a creative idea to think about. If I can go back, I'm 61 years old. Okay, so just to be transparent. So many years ago, I was 18. And what have I learned along the way? So I've had the education. So I have both a bachelor's degree and a PhD. So I went to college for 8 years. I've been in the petrochemical industry for 35 years now. I go to a lot of leadership conferences. I love to learn. What makes people good leaders. And I think that's really important because not only just in the commercial sense, but even in the family sense, what makes you a good leader at home? And I love to read books. So we'll come back to the slide at the tail end, but what would I tell my 18-year-old self? So start with the family, most important, and yes, we are Aggies. So this was from last weekend at the University of South Carolina football game, which the Aggies won. So this is my family. So my 2 sons, Caleb on the far right, Kevin on the almost far left, my bride of 35 years, Andrea, right in front of me, holding our beautiful granddaughter, Eleanor, and then our 2 granddaughters, our 2 daughters-in-law, who we call daughters, so Megan and Renee. So this is us at this fountain, and the reason why we took the picture of this fountain is this is where I proposed to my wife back in the day. So a lot of fond memories. So that's us. Now about the company I work for, just real quickly. CP Chem was a great company to work for. It had enormous growth potential, continues to grow. They're now an $18 billion company. They started back in the year 2000 as a much smaller firm, but they've done a great job of growing, and they continue to be a company that's making a great impact in a very positive way worldwide. I joined Vopak back in June. Vopak has 78 terminals. Terminals meaning places where you store chemicals, big tanks. 78 terminals, 28 countries, 15 plus industrial clusters. We store over 250 products. And this has to be one of the most challenging things in terms of storage, because you've got to know how to store every one of these products. And these products are not necessarily things that people are always familiar with. So you have to learn before you store. And what's even more interesting now, the reason why I joined Vopak is because they're a 400-year-old company. They began in Rotterdam in the shipping industry, and now they're trying to reinvent themselves. And this is their new strategy. The new strategy is to continue to improve on their just routine business. That's the improve circle. The grow circle is growing in industrial and gas terminals. Picture natural gas, because natural gas has a lower carbon footprint than crude oil. So people are going to natural gas for the lower carbon footprint and for the lower emissions. But they're also getting to accelerate. Accelerate is sustainable feedstocks, chemical recycling of plastics, hydrogen, ammonia, things like that. So they've made a commitment to spend 1 billion euros in the growth sector and 1 billion euros in the accelerate sector by 2030. So they hired me to work in the green box here. So I work in the green box in plastics recycling. Now, a little bit about my background. This is going to be important for the last slide. So I grew up in Natick, Massachusetts, so way up here in the Northeast, where it's cold and rainy and whatnot. Got my bachelor's degree from the University of Vermont. And the reason I bring this up is because my family really thought I was going to be a medical doctor, and I was encouraged to go into medicine. And so I went to Vermont. That's where my uncle went to medical school, and I was encouraged to follow in his footsteps. And this is an important topic for later on, but remember that story. After 4 years at Vermont, I ended up with my bachelor's degree, and I realized that as a chemist, you need to get a PhD in order to become a professional. So I actually didn't have enough money to visit Texas first, so I actually had a one-way plane ticket to Texas. I flew down when I was accepted to Texas A&M, and I got an apartment over the phone. I'd never seen Texas before, but this was my chance to grow. So I actually took the trip all the way down to Texas, flew into Hobby Airport, took a bus to College Station, and a cab to my apartment. And that's where my PhD work began. Turned out to be the best decision I ever made. Probably the riskiest, but the best. After I finished my PhD, I worked with a guy named Dr. Al Cotton, who was nominated for the Nobel Prize a number of times. Never won, but he was nominated, and he was a fantastic mentor. Did a postdoctoral research appointment at the University of Texas, so got to see a lot of burnt orange. And then I worked for Phillips, worked for Chevron Chemical, Chevron Phillips, and now I'm with Royal Vopak. Okay. Now, what's my passion? My passion career-wise is the circular economy. And so think that this way. This is a schematic, but if you look at the blue circle, we take resources, we convert resources to usable products. So picture a tree. We find a tree, cut it down, make it into lumber, make a house, and then we use it. And then when the time comes to replace the house, we take the house apart and we throw away the wood. Okay, that's a simple picture. Same for plastics. Take natural gas from the ground, make plastic, manufacture into a cup, use the cup, throw the cup away, goes into the landfill. That's called the linear economy. This is something we can no longer afford to do. Our world has 6+ billion people, shooting towards 8. The resources are limited. We can't continue to just be wasteful of resources. So we're trying to encourage an industry, the circular economy. The circular economy is when you take a resource, you make a product, you use it, and then you recover it. You can recover it and repurpose it, just use it again and again. You can remanufacture it. Picture a washing machine, you now repair it instead of just replacing it, or recycling the material like plastics. We'll talk about that, or aluminum or glass, things like that. Okay. Now, my passion is in the plastics field because I've worked in plastics for a number of years. And in fact, today I still work in plastics. There are 7 categories of plastics. Okay. So when you see these little chasing arrow triangles, that doesn't mean the material is recycled. It means that's the category for the recycle category for recycling. So PET, for example, that's for like water bottles. Those are very easily recycled. High density polyethylene, like a milk jug, easily recycled, but doesn't necessarily mean they are. PVC, like water lines, you see when people put those little white water lines in the ground for sprinklers and whatnot. Low density polyethylene, which is like bread bags. Polypropylene, like cups, they can withstand a higher temperature, so they're microwavable. Polystyrene, like clamshells for for whenever you buy you get takeout from the restaurant. And then there's other is polycarbonates, nylons, all kinds of other things. So there's seven basic categories of plastics. Okay, how do we make them? We make the plastics by taking natural gas and converting the gas into what we call a monomer. That's the building block, like a Lego. And then we take that Lego when we put a lot of Legos together into something that's finally usable. So in the case of ethylene, we would take something like ethane. We'd heat it to about 1500 to 1600 degrees Fahrenheit for about a half a second. Here it goes. Ethane goes to ethylene and hydrogen. And you only want one hydrogen to come off, not 2 or 3. If you go to 2 hydrogens, you get acetylene. If you get all the hydrogen off, now you have charcoal. You want ethylene, so you have to be very careful how you run these reactions. So that's what folks like Chevron Phillips do every day in millions and millions of pounds. Once you get the ethylene, now you want to make polyethylene. So you take another reactor, take that gas, and you combine the gas with a catalyst. The catalyst encourages the ethylene to knit itself into another ethylene. So now picture Lego blocks one after another. They all line up. Now you get a long molecule, and that's now useful for making a bread bag, for making a milk jug, for making other articles, cups, things like that. There's lots of different polyethylene processes. This one's one that the Chevron Phillips happens to operate. This is one that Chevron Phillips and Dow and ExxonMobil and others operate. This is called a gas phase. And then there's others as well. But the point is, once you get the polyethylene, now you have to make it into something useful. If you want to make a bottle, for example, say you want to make a single-use bottle, you would take the polyethylene, put it into a mold like this on the left-hand side. You set the mold is at the right temperature to do its work. The mold closes. You inflate the bottle the plastic in the mold with air. The polyethylene would freeze, and then you pull the mold out. You trim off the excess, and now you have a bottle. But these things happen very, very rapidly. So line speed is very, very important. So that's how you would make a bottle. Say you want a trash bag. If you want a trash bag, you would take that polyethylene, a different grade in all likelihood. You put it in what's called a blown film line. So this is a big bubble, like you're chewing bubble gum. You blow a bubble, and now that bubble is stretched maybe 2-3 stories tall, and it goes into a winder, into a spool, and then it goes all the way down and is ultimately onto a roller, which winds up all that film. But now you picture if you had a bubble that is now a cylinder, you pinch off the top and bottom, now you have a bag. And so this is done at very high rates of speed as well. So what I want to get out of this is that the sophistication of the plastics industry. This takes a lot of work, a lot of equipment, a lot of capital to pull this off. Now, picture something even more complex, something that we're all familiar with, these little single-serve plastic packages for ketchup, or for stand-up pouches, or for candy bars, like if you've had a Kit Kat lately. These are called multi-layer films. And in this case, you don't use just one type of plastic, you use multiple types of plastic. So now you have maybe a 5-layer construct where you may have the external film layers. You may have a layer of foil to keep the air and moisture out, to keep the food products fresh and to improve the shelf life. You may have a film layer that is where you would put the ink and the coatings. So these are very, very complex. These can be 5, 7, 9 as high. They can be 17 layers thick. So these are very, very complicated structures. And the thing is, we've been able to make them so efficiently. They're now inexpensive enough to use in all kinds of applications. And you would use like the Kit Kat one time and throw it away. So that's the problem. Now, here's some graphics that I want to thank Chevron Phillips for keeping on their website, because I think they're fantastic. Why do we use these plastics in the first place? Well, the reason why we use these plastics is because they're light, they're efficient, they're inexpensive, and they get the job done better than anything else. So if you want a gallon of milk, if you want if you want to package 10 gallons of milk, if you put it in plastic, you'll need 2 pounds of plastic. If you want to use glass, like we did in the old days, whenever I was a small child, that's going to take 40 pounds of glass for the same volume of milk. Now imagine that. Imagine you've got a truck and you're shipping all this milk to the grocery store. You've got so much more weight that you have to deal with if you put it in glass versus plastic. Is glass always the worst option? No, there's cases where glass is better than plastics. But by and large, in the case of milk, for example, you would always want to put in plastic for the lowest carbon footprint, not only for the material itself, but for the transportation cost. Same for other packaging. The biggest component of landfills that are such a big problem is not plastic and it's not cans, it's food. Food spoils, but about a third of all food spoils before it reaches our tables. And that's an enormous problem, because once food spoils, it breaks down, it forms methane. Methane's greenhouse gas multiple is 23 times worse greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So you don't want methane in the environment, but when food decomposes, that's what happens. So we want the food to be used for its intended purpose, and we want to make sure that we maximize shelf life. That's why we use plastics for those purposes as well. Okay, so here's the problems. I told you how good plastic is. That's fantastic. Now, what's the problem? The problem is the linear economy versus the circular. So remember, before we talked about we want to produce the material, we want to use it, and we want to find a way to reuse that material again and again and again in the circular economy. Plastics have posed a problem because they're hard to recycle. So plastics overall, the numbers 1 through 7, collectively in the US, we recycle about 9% plastics. And that's it. That's really disappointing. And that's what we're working on today to fix. The same recycle numbers are typical around the world. There are some that are recycled at a much higher rate. So picture bottles versus film. Bottles are recycled at about 30%. Not bad. We need to do better, but we're off to a good start on bottles. So high density like milk jugs, PET bottles like water, soda, those are recycled at a fairly high rate. They're easy to collect, they're easy to clean, and they tend to be one material, so they're easier to recycle. Glass is about the same rate of recycling. Tires a bit more. Aluminum cans are 50%. We should recycle every aluminum can we use. Please don't put aluminum cans in the trash. Steel cans, corrugated boxes, like you see at a grocery store. You look in the back of a grocery store, you'll find all these boxes all piled up. They are being recycled because stores would rather recycle them and get something for them than to pay money for them to be landfilled. So there's some incentive. Tires, when you buy a set of tires for your car, you're going to pay a fee for those tires to be recycled. That's called extended producer responsibility. So there is mechanisms in place to encourage recycling. And so that's what we need for plastics too. Okay, so why am I telling you all this? The reason I'm telling you this is I work in advanced recycling or chemical recycling. There's 2 different kinds of recycling, mechanical and chemical. And let me just get through this really quickly so you just get an idea of what I do for a living. And this is what really inspires me, is that the opportunity to work in this space. Mechanical recycling is taking those bottles, if you get a milk jug, you shred it, you wash it, and then you can mold it into a new bottle. It works great for the 1s or 2s, so PET or high density. but it has to be a simple structure, and it usually goes into non-regulated applications. So not food, not pharmaceuticals, so applications that don't have any health implications for people. Advanced recycling or chemical recycling is something a lot like that. You take the plastic waste, and now you convert it back to feedstock. So you heat that plastic, you break it into a liquid. That liquid is now used to make new plastics again and again and again. And when you do that, you end up with a brand new polymer. That polymer can then be put into any kind of application, including food or pharmaceuticals, because that's brand new polymer. It doesn't have any residue from the past polymers because you've broken it down into liquid form and you've reconstructed the polymer from scratch. So for mechanical recycling, when you take all these different polymers and you melt them down, a lot of times there's different colors. Like if you go to get a detergent bottle from the grocery store and it's Tide, it'll be orange. If it's another brand, it might be blue. If you take orange and blue and green and white, you put them all together, you get gray. You can recycle those products and get something like this on the right-hand side. It's very possible. So, but it has limitations. Chemical recycling, you put into a plant like on the right-hand side. This happens to be the Altera Energy plant in Ohio. This is from their website. But what you do is you take that mixed bale, the plastics, you heat it in a furnace at pretty high temperatures. Once it's heated, it breaks down into what's called char or charcoal, 10%. About 70% becomes an oil, and then 20% becomes a light gas. You take that oil and you put it back into your reactor, and you make more plastic out of that. So that's really what we're doing. And so the question is, if you want to recycle something, you have these two items. You have a milk jug. How would you recycle that? And I just told you that's the one that you want to put into mechanical recycling. You melt it, reuse it. The polymer degrades a little bit. If you take the pink top and the white bottom, it'll have a little pinkish color to it. If you have a blue cap like some milk does, or green cap, now you're going to get gray. The right-hand side, this chip bag has aluminum. It has different polymers. It's got some grease from the chips. If you melted that down and tried to make something out of it, you couldn't do it. That's why they end up getting thrown away. That's why the recycle rates are so low. But if you use chemical recycling, which is a brand new technology, which we're just starting to get commercialized, that can now be recycled. And that's what I'm so excited about, because now we have a good opportunity to go from the linear economy to the circular economy, which is our aspirational goal, because we have got to use plastics over and over again. We can't afford to throw these things away. Okay. This is a slide that I really love, because not because my name's on it. That's not it. What I love about it is that the idea of recycling is not just companies. It's not just legislators. It's all of us. It's a team sport. Everyone has to play their role to recycle. You've got to have companies that are willing to do it. You've got to have technology, so scientists that have invented it and that can make this as efficient as possible. You've got to have leaders, community leaders that institute recycling capability in their towns. You've got to have citizens like you and me that put the recycled products in the right bins, okay? If people don't put material back in the recycle bins, there's no feedstock for us to use. We can't get to the recycling targets we want to get to. So this is truly a team sport. We all have to play in this arena. Okay, so I told you my passion over the past 5-6 years has been this chemical recycling, because I see there's so much opportunity here. But I didn't start in chemical recycling. I actually started as a lab chemist working on catalysts for polyethylene. Then I progressed as a leader in R&D. I became a business leader, like Kenny had just mentioned. So I was involved in the sales and marketing of a product line. I was in our corporate planning group doing strategy, but my favorite job of all has been the plastics recycling. And so what would I tell my 18-year-old self? Now, if I look back all these years, what would I tell myself? Well, here's what I would tell myself, and here's what I'll tell you. Society needs all sorts of creative people. So become creative, but do it in a field you really enjoy. Find something you enjoy that you can make money at. Don't be motivated by the money, be motivated by the joy of innovation, creativity. If it's in the creative arts, be the best one you can be. If it's in engineering, be the best engineer you can be, but do something that you really enjoy. Number two, your job doesn't define you. Okay. I'm an employee of a company because I need to feed my family, but my job doesn't define me. My friends don't define me. Parents don't define you. Define yourself. So decide who you want to be and be the best person you can be. Okay. And I'll show you an example in a few minutes. You don't have to have it all figured out. I didn't become a chemical recycling specialist when I was 18 or 19. I had no idea what that even was. I'm a student of chemistry and a student of technology, and I love where technology and commercial comes together, and you find you can make something that people need, that society wants, and that is profitable. So be a student. Don't forget there's a big difference between career and job. A job is what pays the bills. You get paid for something. Careers are personalized pathways to do something that solves problems or generates value that you really care about. Find a career that you can enjoy. Make sure you get paid enough to survive doing that, but find a career you can really enjoy. So if you like science, get into the science and do that. If you like business, boy, get your MBA, become a business specialist, do something that you really have a passion for. That passion may change, and that's okay too. Be willing to take chances and change your career pathway as you see yourself growing in different fields. You start to learn about things that you really want to do. But for professional satisfaction, you need both a career and a job, but don't confuse the two. And don't define yourself by your job. And then lastly, life can be really hard. It can be really hard. My life has not been as hard as other people's has. So I've been very blessed that way, but try to surround yourself with positive people. I have the best wife in the world. I'll tell you that 100 times. She really supports me in what I do, and I support her with what she does. She also works outside the home as well. But surround yourself with positive people that can help you feel better about yourself, but give you sound advice. Not people that just tell you what you want to hear. Find people that are a positive influence on you. So let's talk about defining the best you. So what I would encourage you to do is think about who you are, who you want to be. Write it down. Write down who you think you want to be, and then become that person. What steps do I have to take to become that person? So today I'm a vice president of chemical recycling. Okay, that's a role that I really have wanted, and I'm really enjoying that now. I'm an inventor, so I have 27 U.S. patents. I really enjoy inventing things, so I've enjoyed that. I'm an author, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather now. There's nothing that's sweeter in my ears than when a 3-year-old says Papa. But I also think about, what else do I really want to be? I want to be generous with time and with money. I want to be faithful to the people and to my God. I want to be very faithful. I want to be disciplined. I want to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do in order to be successful. And that's what I struggle with sometimes, to be honest. So that's a day-to-day decision. I want to be optimistic and I want to be caring. And I'll give you one more example. About 6 or 7 years ago, I decided I wanted to be a marathon runner. Now that's something that takes discipline, and it's something that you don't do overnight. It's a 6-month training curriculum every time you do it. And so this past January, I finished my 5th marathon. So that's not to pat myself on the back. It's to say that you can take an aspirational goal and you can put your mind to it and you can do it. So think about, and I do this annually. Every January 1st, I take time to take a step back and say, okay, what am I going to do the next 12 months that really matters? What's the most important thing in my life? And how am I going to get there? So think about this, but make sure that you define yourself. Don't let other people define you, okay? They don't have that right unless you give it to them. You are the one that defines you. So think about who you want to be, and then think about how do you get there. Okay, and with that, I'm going to take a pause, and I'm going to see if anyone has any questions, because the 30 minutes is up, and now we have 30 minutes for any kind of questions you want to fire at me, and anything's fair game.
I'll go ahead and kick it off. Students, you know that you can use the chat, you can use the Q&A. By all means, either way, it works. So what skills would you say kind of made you, I mean, I'm assuming that a lot of your career has been about innovation, right? Like the technology, the things that you're working on are constantly changing. What skills would you say, or like made you a good fit for kind of an emerging field? Because there's some folks that kind of want to know they want to have the knowns, right? They want to they're not necessarily, I would assume that in this field, there's a lot of things that are constantly being creative. There's new innovations, there's new technologies. Can you speak a little bit about what might make someone who wants to follow in your footsteps, kind of the skills and or choices some things you were doing right along the way?
Yeah. Okay. Monica, that's a great question. So when I go back to the early days, I got into chemistry because I like to work with my hands. So I like to work on cars. I like to build things. And I wasn't good at memorization. Biology took a lot of memorization. That's why I didn't go to medical school. I really didn't have the skills and the grades to get into medical school. Part of it was because I took some bad advice and I double majored biology and chemistry. That was terrible advice that I got, and I didn't listen. I didn't think about it at the time, and then I realized I was grinding myself to sand. So, but what I realized after a couple of years of struggling was I got to pick what works for me, and so I picked chemistry because I worked my hands, and I love to solve problems. So that was a good fit. The other good fit was just not being patient enough to handle R&D. Our research and development, there's a lot more failure than success. So you can't be too hard on yourself. And the other thing is just to be curious. If it's something that you enjoy, which I did, great. But if I was 2 years into chemistry and I didn't enjoy it, I would have hoped that I would have picked something else, something that really appealed to me. So find your passion. If you take a class and you really like that topic, take another one, read a book, learn more. And the last one I'll say is find a mentor. I was really lucky. I was working at a YMCA day camp, and there was a gentleman who was a benefactor, and he was there, and we struck up a conversation. And I didn't realize who he was at first. His name was Milton Eisenhower. His brother was the president of the United States many years earlier, and he was now a professor at Johns Hopkins University. And so we struck up a relationship and started started writing back and forth. And he encouraged me to go into chemistry. So the short version of the answer is find your passion, chase it, but find a good mentor. Find someone that you can really trust, that inspires you, that can help you guide through the uncertainties, because when you're 16, 17, 18, you don't have the answers. You shouldn't. How could you possibly? I didn't, but I found someone that did. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I think, Carson, you had a question, so I'm going to bring you over. You can unmute.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I am Carson's mother. And I was just curious if you could talk about any new developments in plastics that are more biodegradable. Like I heard that there were some being utilized with like corn or coconut or things like that.
Yeah, that's a big field of study right now. So people are trying to figure out, how do you make materials out of non-fossil resources? And then can you make them so that they are biodegradable? So if we throw something away into the trash, we don't have to feel guilty about it because it breaks down. So this is an area of controversy too. So there are materials that are starches that you can make, like PLA, PHA, and so people are using those for tableware, for single-use silverware and things like that. So the good news is they can be made, and the industry is still growing. They do break down. They don't break down into soil per se, but they do break down once they're in the right conditions. But they take industrial composters typically. So if you put in the trash and you go back to the trash after months and months, you'll find it looks the same. If it goes into an industrial digester, it can break down. So it's because we don't have the infrastructure yet. The other problem with organic materials like that PLAs, PHAs, is you can't get them into the plastics recycling stream that's being recycled conventionally because it contaminates it, and then all the plastic gets thrown away. So it's a double-edged sword. My view, I think there's a place for the organically sourced material. I would like to see us have more conventional material made from fossil and non-fossil sources. Like you can make ethanol and turn the ethanol into ethylene, and then get that into a conventional polymer. But what we have to do eventually is make sure that each of these streams has its own recycling pathway, so we recover all of it. So I hope that answers your question. But yeah, it's an emerging field, and I think ultimately what we have to do is find the lowest carbon footprint and most recyclable options for everything we use: plastics, aluminum, paper, cardboard, everything. I hope that helped. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, great. Who else has a question?
I'll jump in. How far are we from, because when you show the bag of potato chips, how far are we from being able to, you know, have a separate bin in our homes that sends that to the curb, and you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, that's a really good question, because up to this point, the US recycling industry is really based on paper. It's really based on newspaper. Remember way back in the old days, people get a newspaper at home and they would read it, they throw it away. So a lot of the infrastructure is really for paper. We're getting better infrastructure now for other materials, but there's a lot of investment that has to go into plastics recycling for us to get these recycle rates higher. So that's where we need the innovators, right? So we need people that are robotics experts, and people that can use optical equipment to do sortation at fast rates. So right now, today, any kind of a bottle you put into the recycle bin, it should be recycled. It should go through the right pathway. Right now, most communities cannot put any film in there. So anything that's a flexible material, like a film, like a chip bag or a bread bag, don't put that into the recycle bin today, because we don't have the infrastructure. It gets thrown away. Hopefully it gets thrown away before it gets wrapped up in the spindles and things like that. So the film is a big problem, but people are working on that. Waste Management has announced an $800 million capital program across the nation, where they're going to now be recycling film. And they have their first pilot in Hickory Hills, Illinois, near Chicago, with Dow Chemical. And they're putting in equipment that can now isolate the film. And here's the challenge. This is kind of interesting. That, well, these for people like me, this is the nerd coming out in me again. But when you take the film, it's two-dimensional, okay? So like a bottle is three-dimensional, film is flat. And when the film goes through a recycling facility, if you sort by dimension, which they do first, they can't tell the difference between paper and film. They're both two-dimensional. But now you have to separate those two, because you don't want to take film and then melt it. Now there's a bunch of paper in it. So they call it fiber. So what Waste Management is doing is they're trying to get the sortation down well enough so they can take the two-dimension to the first sort, so you get the two-dimension, and now take that and distinguish between paper and plastic at high rates of speed on the sortation line. And they have that technology, so they can get down below 5% fiber, which is fantastic. So that's what they're trialing in Hickory Hills. If successful, they'll continue to replicate that in different parts of the nation. So to answer your question, that's what the biggest challenge is right now, is getting more film recycled. Today you can recycle film, but you have to take it back to the store. So I don't know how many people take it back to the store. Most people don't. I do, but I'm in the business, so I have no excuse. But if you take your bread bags and your freezer bags, clean them, but then bring them back to the store. And that's another message that I should emphasize. When you recycle your plastics, say you want to recycle your milk jug, you've got to rinse it and get it as dry as you can. Okay, you don't have to dab it out with paper towels, but get it as clean as you can, because any kind of food waste or any kind of contaminants makes it much harder for the person downstream to try to make something useful out of it. So a peanut butter jar, please don't put the peanut butter jar in the recycle bin without cleaning it all out. My wife puts it in our dishwasher, oddly enough, and it shrinks it down. It's maybe that's not a good idea, but it gets all the peanut butter out. And now there's a fighting chance of recycling it. So if we can get everyone to do this, this is the team sport thing. If we can get everyone to clean the plastics, put the bottles in the recycle bin, take the film back to the store, that's perfect. One other thing I'll mention, there's a consortium right now in this area. Cyclex is working with ExxonMobil and LyondellBasell. We have our first full stream plastics recycling pilot happening in Kingwood. And in Kingwood, you can take a plastic bag, put in your milk jug, your chip bags, any plastics, all in one bag, and bring it to a recycle center, and they're going to recycle all that. And so and most of that is going towards the advanced recycling. They're breaking it down to a liquid and then rebuilding the polymer. So this is where the future is going. So this is what I do for a living now, because this is where the future is for plastics. We've got to get those recycle rates up. It's downright embarrassing that our recycle rates are so low for plastics. This has got to change. I'm hoping by the next time the EPA does their fact sheets, that we'll see a much bigger bar for all these. We need to recycle everything better, but 9% on plastics is just not acceptable. You can see why the plastics industry has so many opponents, but we can't just ban plastics, because the plastics are so light and so useful and they keep food so fresh. If you ban the plastics now, you've actually taken away one of the most important tools for a lower carbon future. And we need to have a low carbon future because of climate change. Okay, looks like Carson has another question here. What kind of waste pollution is produced with chemical liquid recycling? There we go. Okay, so one of the positives for mechanical recycling is that it's about an 80% lower carbon footprint than conventional production. So it's really good. Chemical recycling is emerging. There's a lot of negative press about chemical recycling. And the reason is because people think about many years ago when we used to pyrolyze tires. Very dirty, very smoky, lots of emissions. So today the technology is getting much better. So a lot of these recycling plants are fairly small, and we're finding that the emissions are very low. So when you do recycle chemically, you'll get a small stream of char, and that can be used for asphalt blends and things like that. You get the liquids. You use almost all the liquids. Those are actually really good feedstock. The gases still need a home. Right now, we use them for fuel for the furnaces, but eventually these will be co-located next to chemical plants, and so ultimately you won't have a lot of waste at all. There's a lot of heat involved, so the biggest challenge right now is handling all the heat. But on an emissions front, they're very clean plants. They do have emissions from the burners that are based upon the fuel that's used. So it's not waste free, but they're becoming much more efficient. But that's an area we need to pay a lot of attention to, because ultimately the chemical recycling will only succeed if, number one, if it's clean, and number two, if it's a lower carbon footprint than conventional production. So those are the two things we're trying to work on. But yeah, it's an emerging field.
Can you talk about the patent process, what that is? We have a lot of students that go through science fair and they're coming up with things and working on their own patents. What's that process like?
Oh, wow. I wish I could have got patents when I was in high school. Yeah, the patent process. Kenny Adams is probably one to talk about this as well. But yeah, the patent process, what the patent is for, it's to take an idea you have and to claim it as yours for 20 years. And so what you do, you're making a deal with the government. You'll say, okay, I'll tell people what my invention is in exchange for me having protection to practice that for 20 years. So if CP Chem or Vopak or another company gets a patent, or you get a patent on something, you decided you figured out a new way to recycle plastics. Okay, you get a patent. That patent now says that no one's allowed to practice that technology without your permission. Okay, you can sell them a license to practice it, but so the process is you have an idea, you write up a patent application, you file it with the government, with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and then your claim structure is reviewed. And ultimately, the U.S. Patent Office will say, yes, this is patentable, it's novel, it's enabling, or no, it's not. So if it's allowed, that's issued. You pay a fee upon issuing, then you pay a maintenance fee for the duration of the patent. And that gives you the right to practice. And no one else is allowed to practice that without your permission. And so it's an expensive process. So individuals usually have a hard time with that. Corporations tend to have more resources. I know CPChem files a lot of patents, but it's to protect their business. So inventors don't have the right to practice. It's the assignee that has the right. So when I worked for CPChem and I was getting patents, those patents were assigned to CPChem. So CPChem had the rights to use that technology and then to license it if they elected to do so, if someone was willing to pay for it. So, but the short version of the story is you have an idea, you come up with claim structures. If a government agency says, yes, these are inventive, now you have a 20-year protection from other people practicing that. Once that expires, anyone can do it, but not until. So it's really an incentive for people to disclose new ideas, because if I see someone else's idea, I can't practice it, but I may learn something. And now I may get my own idea, and now I patent something, and then and then hopefully that promotes and incentivizes innovation.
So if someone wanted to follow in your footsteps and kind of work in that field, do you recommend the chemistry degree? Is there some other field of study that you think is sort of the next wave, or what would be kind of your recommendation?
Yeah. So if it depends. If you like laboratory work and you like theoretical things, then the chemistry degree is a really good way to go. The good news is it's rewarding. There's a lot of opportunity. The bad news is you'll require a PhD to do it. So that'll be 8 years of study. If you don't have the patience or the finances or whatever reason, engineering, you can typically get a 4-year degree, a bachelor's degree, and get involved with innovation with an engineering degree. So engineers are typically taking a process and scaling it up or building more efficiencies. So if you like to invent things, do something brand new, build molecules for the first time that never been made before, chemistry is your gig. If you want to do a lot of process improvement, if you really like taking a process and say, hey, I can get this thing 10% better by adjusting the heat balance, or I can change the way the catalyst is fed to the reactor. If that sounds more interesting, engineering is a better bet. So yeah, I think it's important to look at both. Frankly, whenever I was in high school, one of my friend's fathers told me that he thought I should have been an engineer, and I like to solve problems. So maybe I don't know whether I did the right thing or not, but I ended up in chemistry. Glad I did. But yeah, that's really the distinction. So chemists tend to be more in the lab, engineers tend to be in the plant. So if you like to be in a big operating plant, then engineering, and with 4, maybe 6 years of study, engineering is the way to go. Yeah, try them both. Talk to engineers, talk to chemists. Try to shadow somebody. Try to go to someone's, say, hey, can I come to your company, just watch you for the morning, see what you do. Sometimes people will let you do that and you learn a lot about what their world looks like. Yeah. Here's a question from Henry Ramirez. After hearing on the news a few years ago that a certain percentage of materials going to recycle bins go to the landfill, and said some people have become skeptical. Yeah. So yeah, that's an issue. There have been some exposés of news reporters following recycle trucks and see what happens to them, and there have been cases where those trucks have, instead of going to the recycle facility, have gone to the landfill and just dumped it. that's pretty deplorable if you think about it from so many ways. But in the past, recycling costs more money than landfill, and so the tip fees, or the cost that the driver has to pay to dump their load, was lower at a landfill than it was at a recycling facility. We're trying to change that now, but that there were some explanations of people deliberately doing the wrong thing. There's other things going on where if you imagine a truck with all these recycled plastics in it, or plastic that should go to recycling, and someone put something in there that leaked oil or something all over those plastics, now they can't be recycled. So there are cases where that load would be rejected for legitimate reasons. There's cases where the load could be rejected for illegitimate reasons, but there are cases where the materials that are intended for recycling don't end up being recycled. And I think now there's more and more attention to this. The problem is it's made people skeptical. So people say, nah, this is all a bunch of BS. No one's recycling. They just say they are. But if you look at the chart, there's still 30% of the ones and twos being recycled. So somebody's recycling. What we're going to see is there will be more and more pressure for people to recycle, because companies are starting to be held accountable for recycling. Companies are starting to make announcements. CP Chem announced that they were going to make 1 million pounds a year of their recycled polymer by 2030. Dow Chemical has come out and said they're going to be making 3 million metric tons of material by 2030. ExxonMobil said they'll make 1 million pounds by 2026. Different companies have said our recycled content for our packages are going to be 25% by this date. So there's more, and then in Europe, they're saying, well, you're going to have 30% recycled content, or you're going to pay a tax on materials that don't meet that. So there's more legislative pressure, there's more consumer pressure, there's more corporate pressure. So I think we're going to see less and less of that material being inappropriately disposed of. But that really hurt the industry when those kind of news reports are coming out, and it made a lot of people skeptical. So hopefully between legislation, company commitments, brand owner commitments, we're going to see more and more recycling going on, because after all, I've got a 3-year-old granddaughter. When she's a 22-year-old engineer and working in some field, I hope that she sees a different world than what we have today. So we've got to all work together to fix that.
Well, I think your point about the financial incentive, people do, you're driven by cost, right? Whether that's dumping or not dumping here versus there, or whether, it's easy for you to just put it in your garage versus put it, it is interesting to see that the financial incentive, whether it's the pressure for the company from legislative or whatever, but that plays a pretty significant role in actions, right? It shapes the way that you do it. So it's interesting to see how those things are changed, whether internally from the companies or externally from taxes and other things. It seems to be a pretty motivating factor.
Oh yeah, I always tell my boys, if you don't know what's going on, just follow the money, and you'll find out pretty quickly. Yeah, and that's really what's motivating companies to make commitments too, because they're starting to realize that if people are starting to turn against the plastics industry because they say you guys aren't sustainable, you better do something. If brand owners are now packaging their food products, but they need to be able to tell people that this is sustainable packaging, they've got to do so. Yeah, we've all got to work together. And then of course there's just the notion of being just a good person. We only have so many molecules in the world. Why in the world are we throwing things away after the first time of use? I've got trash, I don't even use t-shirt bags anymore at the grocery store. I bring a woven bag. And for produce, you can buy woven bags on Amazon, little bags you can put in the washing machine. But all that to say, when I do use one of those thin plastic bags from the grocery store, we use it over and over again. So we become really soft as a society. We're very convenience focused, and we can't live that way anymore. We've got to change the way we look at our resources, and we've got to become more responsible. We generally speaking are a little bit too self-centered, and we need to think about the next generation and the generation beyond that. Yeah, and I'm just as guilty as anybody else. Fun fact, after I got into sustainability, I started realizing, wow, we throw a lot of stuff in our trash. And so we should recycle more plastics. So that was a good idea. We started composting. So I bought a rotary composter from Amazon. So now it was stunning. What I learned is that now when it comes, we have our trash picked up twice a week and recycling once a week. The recycle bin is nearly full. The trash, we put our trash out maybe once a week in a trash bag and it may be half full. And that's just my wife and me. So that's a different scenario than it was when the boys were small. But the point being that we learned there's a lot of things we can do differently. So yeah, we're challenging ourselves. How little trash can we put out a week? Can we do a small t-shirt bag? Can we get it that low? So because what we really want is for the world to be totally different by the time I see Corinne's little one on her lap. When he's our age, we need to have a different world. We can't continue to do these kind of things. So that's the goal. So I love seeing small kids because it reminds me that we can't keep on living the way we did whenever we were younger. We've got to fix our pathways.
Now he thinks you're talking to him, so he's just going to keep showing Kim's face.
Of course, we are talking to him. We're glad to see he's here.
Really quickly before we end, do you have any recommendations for the students of clubs or groups that they should look out for to be a part of in high school, maybe in college, if going the chemistry route is what they're interested in?
Yeah, you know what? If you're in chemistry or engineering, there's national organizations. Become the best you can in that field. So there's the American Chemistry Society, American Chemical Society for chemists. There's AICHE for engineers. They're always looking for students. They're always looking for people to join up. Because any one of these disciplines, it starts with being a very good practitioner of your field of study. So I want to be a sustainability guy, but I can't be a sustainability guy unless I become a darn good chemist. I can't be a good sustainability guy if I'm not a darn good engineer. So join one of those organizations. They have green chemistry subgroups, so you can join a sustainability subgroup. And there's all kinds of things. If sustainability is your area you like, so there's lots of different clubs there. Watch out to make sure that they're following the science, because there's a lot of folklore. There's a lot of well-intended people that are presenting only half the facts. So one thing I'd say is read. Clubs are great, but make sure you also get the facts. Stephen Koonin wrote a book called Unsettled. It talks about the science behind climate change. Very interesting. Bill Gates wrote a book on sustainability, which is just basic stuff, but really good stuff to read. There's a book called The Plastics Paradox that Chris Diarmot wrote, and I bought a copy, not realizing that he finally just put out on the internet for free. It talks about just the carbon footprint advantages and the reason why plastics are valuable. So what the science is behind that. So yeah, join one of the clubs that are really good. They have local chapters as well as national chapters. So AICHE or ACS, but also do some reading. Find some really good books, and read the more conservative ones, read the more liberal ones, and try to get a full picture. So this is where we think for ourselves. Part of defining yourself is deciding what you deciding that you're going to be disciplined enough to educate yourself. Yeah. Great question.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. We're up on the 7:30 time, and we like to respect your time as presenter, but also students. We know that you've got tests and activities and games and things over the weekend, so we just want to make sure that we stay on time. Students, if you can use the chat to help me thank Dr. Abbott for joining us this evening, I almost said this morning, this evening, for sharing kind of your path and the things that you're working on and learning. We really appreciate you taking time out of your evening to join us. And that 9%, I'm thinking we need to get our basket of recycling together, and we need to do a better job of it as I'm using my aluminum can. So thank you so much for